Who knew that the same company that made the twist ties around your loaf of bread also made the face shield delivered to your front door?
We are TFR, Truth Frequency Radio.
Welcome to Spirit's Journey, coming to you live on Truth Frequency Radio and simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio. Your hosts are Patrick and Kathryn Andries.
Join us each week as we explore a wide range of metaphysical topics such as dreams, astrology, intuitive readings, and life purpose. You'll receive practical guidance so that you can live your most awesome life.
Learn more about what we do at intuitiveschool.com and connect with us on Facebook at Spirit's Journey Radio. The Spirit's Journey, we are coming to you live on Truth Frequency Radio and simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio, among many others. For example, you can find us on iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and TalkStream Live. See our Facebook page for a full list of all the places that you can now hear us. We are here in the Heartland, holding the energy for spiritual truth and awareness. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Kathryn. Welcome, everyone. We're excited to be here today. And we have somebody today who I think has a very important message during these crazy, chaotic times. A couple of years ago, Patrick and I went to Florida for a Universal Lightworkers Conference, and we had the pleasure of meeting Robert Mack. And we were just blown away by his message and the depth of his understanding of things. And so this is our second time having him on as a guest, and I'm going to tell you a little about him. Robert is an Ivy League educated positive psychology expert, a celebrity happiness coach, executive coach, and author. So he studied under the direction of Martin Seligman, the founder of positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. And UPenn is the top institution in the world to offer a master's degree program in applied positive psychology. Robert is one of the world's leading experts on the relationship between happiness and success. He helps individuals and organizations achieve an energizing balance of authentic personal happiness and effortless professional success. All this is based on time-tested, face-valid, empirical data and timeless transcendental wisdom. Robert's work has been endorsed by people such as Oprah, Vanessa Williams, and many others. And you may have seen him as a featured guest expert on shows such as Good Morning America, The Today Show, Access Hollywood, E! Network, OWN, KTLA, and magazines such as Self, Health, GQ, Cosmopolitan, and Glamour. His first book, which if you have not read, I highly recommend it, is called Happiness from the Inside Out, The Art and Science of Fulfillment. So welcome, Robert.
Hey, Robert.
Hi, guys. I'm so grateful to be here. My goodness, it's so nice to reconnect.
Well, yes, and you have such a powerful message, Robert, that I think in these times we definitely need your message. So let's just start and you do something that's a little bit different, being a positive psychology expert and celebrity happiness coach. So maybe you could go into a little more detail about what it is that exactly you do.
Yeah, so basically I help people become happier, and by becoming happier, I help them become more successful. There's an entire body of research, just about 2 decades old, Ivy League research. It was founded out of the University of Pennsylvania, an Ivy League institution that is really the study and science of what makes life worth living and how happiness leads to success. I think most of us think success leads to happiness, but most of us have also been disabused of that idea. And so there are all these really fascinating ways in which we can get better results in our life with less time, energy, and effort, particularly when it comes to happiness, but also success.
It's really interesting because I started getting into the field of metaphysics about 1990, and around that time, it was almost unheard of in psychology, in terms of doing studies about happiness and things like that. That was kind of considered a little bit maybe foo-foo. So I'm really glad to see that that's changed a lot.
You just nailed it, Patrick. It's so interesting because, psychology as a science has mostly sort of historically been about studying mental illness and mental dysfunction and, sort of what's going wrong. But Martin Seligman, after a period of doing just that, studying learned helplessness and depression, he eventually came to discover that even when you remove everything that's going wrong with an individual, you don't often or always get happy, healthy, thriving individuals. You often just get flatlining individuals. And so that's precisely what birthed positive psychology and the study of what makes life worth living.
Well, I remember reading a bio of Wayne Dyer, the great late Wayne Dyer, and it was describing in there when he was going in for his doctorate thesis that he was saying basically what you're saying, that psychology at that time, it was all based on pathologies and everything that was going wrong. And he's like, I don't want to do that. I just want to focus on, how can we be happy? How can we focus on the positive side of psychology? And it was pretty revolutionary at the time. So I'm glad that there were really forward thinkers like Wayne Dyer and like your professors who you worked with and you moving into that field, because that's long been my belief that, when we're focusing on the positive side of things, that we're really going to have to worry less and less and less about all the pathologies that are going on. It's like give people something to live for, something to work for.
That is just so true. I love you saying that, and it reminds me, there's probably lots of us are feeling lots of stress and anxiety, maybe worry, concern, and unhappiness these days. And part of that is because of a negativity bias. It's a cognitive bias that's sort of built into the brain, and what they've essentially found within this field of positive psychology is that you need about 5 positive experiences or 5 positive comments to compensate for one negative experience or one negative comment or whatever. And so, it's especially important today, but always, to focus increasingly in ways that make you happy, not just because happiness is good, because it feels good, but also because it does great things for you. We know based on, all these, thousands of studies, that happier people experience the best of life. They experience better objective circumstances, conditions. They make more money, about $600,000 to $700,000 more on average over the course of their entire lifetime. They live 6 to 7 years longer than unhappy people. They get married early, or they stay married longer, and they're happier in all their relationships, whether they're married or not. They experience less job burnout. And so in all ways, happiness really is sort of a lazy, intelligent, or master key shortcut to living your best life.
So I want to circle back real quick, because something that you said amazes me, that it takes 5 positive comments to sort of undo one negative comment. Now, I'm curious if the research that you've done and looked at, that if it says anything about positive thoughts versus negative thoughts, is it about the same ratio?
That's right. It exactly is. It's about 5 to 1, no matter which way you cut it. I would say that, most of the research initially found it was like 3 to 1 just to maintain a flatlining experience. And it was 4 to 1 just to get barely above that. And in order to sort of thrive, whether it's as an individual, whether it's in terms of a relationship, it's 5 to 1. And so it certainly applies to your own thoughts, as well as to conversations you have and things that you consume, whether it's, through visual means or auditory means. But yes, absolutely applies to thoughts, just as it does so many other things.
So, Robert, have you found like a tool or a trick to change that so that our mind naturally hooks on to the good as opposed to the bad? And also along that same line, then, do you think that, well, go ahead and, do you have a tool that kind of reverses that?
Yes, Kathryn, I do. I've, tried so many in my life. My goodness. I mean, it's like, you try doing things the other way where you're focused on the negative and you just think, that somehow, some way, maybe you'll stumble into happiness, but it doesn't really happen that way. So I've tried many different things. I think from an empirical perspective, we do know that the 3 blessings exercise or 3 gratitudes exercise is very effective. That's just, noticing and reminding yourself of the 3 things that day that you're most grateful for, the 3 things that happened that day that went well. But I've also found that instead of just doing that, when that is great, I like to just focus on telling a better feeling story based in truth about everything and everybody in my life, starting with myself, right? So I just do what I can every single day, no matter what situation I'm faced with or who I'm in conversation with, to try to positively reframe everything that I'm experiencing and everything that I'm observing in ways that are equally true to the negative or pessimistic story, but are much more constructive and helpful and supportive to myself and others and the world at large. And so I think if you can just begin to tell a better feeling story based in truth to yourself and to your friends and your family members, and you practice it you become better and better at it. And that's not always an easy thing. It is a simple thing, but it's not always an easy thing. Sometimes you're just feeling so out of sorts or so upset that it feels nearly impossible. So I always say, if you can't be positive, at least be quiet. And if you can't be quiet, at least be positive. But the other alternative doesn't work very well, you know.
Well, yeah, when you're talking about being quiet, that reminds me of meditation. And really, so many people have come to me and said, I would love to be able to start a meditation practice, but every time I sit down, my mind is just racing. And I've learned over the years that really the key to successful meditation is to start with learning how to focus your mind, how to still the mind so that you can really listen, because otherwise you can't really go into that quiet place.
Isn't that the truth? And you two are experts at this, by the way. This isn't just a way for I know all the listeners, feel that palpable presence that comes through you all when we're listening to your show. But in person, in real life, this is the way you all are. You're very tapped in, tuned in, turned on, and you're great listeners, and you're very present. And I know that comes from, lots of practice with meditation, with quieting your mind. I know the first experience I had with meditation, I thought I was having a panic attack. I thought the walls were closing in. It felt like impossible. And so, I also realized that because it was so hard, it was probably something I really needed to work at doing. So I discovered a few things along the way. And first I realized that an hour was probably too long for me. So then I dialed it back to a half hour. That still felt too long. I dialed it back to 5 minutes. That felt too long. I eventually discovered maybe I was the worst meditator on the planet. So I just simply committed to doing one breath. I said, well, maybe if I'm the, worst at meditation on the planet, I can do one breath. And I realized, hey, I can do one breath. I can take one breath in through the nose and, into the nose and out of the nose. And I can breathe from the stomach instead of breathing from the chest. And I can do it simply for the joy of it, while I let all my thoughts go. And thoughts sort of bubble to the surface, or if I get distracted, I'll notice that quote unquote distraction, and I'll notice those thoughts or those emotions, and I'll observe them without judgment, and I'll let them go. And I'll just come back to the experience of breathing from the stomach. But I'll only do it for the joy of it. I won't do it to try to get good at it. That's one way not to get very good very quickly, is to make a goal of it, but instead just enjoy it. And I found that was so effective for me because it was so enjoyable, and I would continue it, and I kept it up for day after day, and I'd do it as often as I can remember throughout the day. And I found that to be one of the greatest, most transformative tips, tricks, and tools I've ever discovered. I call it a micro meditation. Some people call it simply practicing the presence. But it's just one breath you take for the sheer pleasure of that breath. And you quickly discover that, and I think it's about within 21 to 66 days, they say, from a neuroscientific perspective, you begin to rewire your brain for a much more cool, calm, collected, and composed experience of life. And so that's probably, I think, one of the greatest practices I've ever committed to, is that micro meditation.
And so, Robert, you do what you do because of your interesting story about your life and how it, led you to this path of positive psychology. So I wonder if you could share what led you to do what you do.
Sure. Yeah, I am the least likely person in the world to be a happiness coach. It's so funny because I felt like I was the unhappiest kid on the planet. I grew up in an incredible family, beautiful, healthy family. We had our stress and anxiety like any other family, but I felt like I was almost born unhappy. And I remember being unhappy at the age of 4 or 5, quite frankly, and very self-loathing. And no matter how well I did at anything, I never felt like I did, well enough. So as time went on, I always thought I'd grow out of that. But that depression and that self-loathing experience grew and deepened, and it just became a darker experience. And before long, I became suicidal. And I would think about killing myself dozens and dozens of times a day. I thought about it more than anything else in the world. I wanted to, not exist more than I wanted to anything else in the world. And so it, part of it was a result of the self-loathing. Part of it was that I was a perfectionist. Part of it was that I was very stressed out and anxious all the time. I was an empath. I was always lost in my own thoughts. But in any case, one day I decided I was going to do some research about the means and methods to kill yourself. I decided I didn't want to, do anything too violent because I didn't want it to be a huge, big event. I just wanted everything to end. So I decided I would slit my wrist. So I went to the kitchen and I get a kitchen knife and, I dug it into my wrist. And to this day, I still have the test marks on my wrist. And something really unpredictable and at the time inexplicable happened. And that is, as I sort of committed to killing myself for like no good reason, and despite no objective change in the circumstances and conditions of my life, subjectively, like on the inside, I felt this indescribable peace and this like limitless love, ineffable joy wash over me. And it was shocking. I was like, wow, like what just happened? Nothing's really changed in the world outside of me and my conditions or circumstances, but I feel so good right now. So at that time, I just decided that I would put off suicide for like an hour, which doesn't seem long to me right now. Probably doesn't seem very long to most people. But at that time, an hour seemed like forever. Like it was a very tall order, and I wasn't even committed to the whole hour. But I thought, well, I'll do some research and I'll try to understand what happened to me in this moment that I felt better, despite really having committed to killing myself. Like, why did I feel better? So over time, I discovered that, first of all, I wasn't alone. And as I did more research, that hour that I committed to postponing my suicide bled into several hours and several days. And now I look back, over 2 decades later now, and I barely recognize, the guy that was so suicidal. But yeah, that's sort of how I became a happiness coach. It was through a long scenic path.
Wow, that is such a powerful and important story. And just as a note here too, because we know that with all the lockdowns going on, that the amount of people who are going into depressions and even contemplating suicide and things like that is increasing because they're cut off from their social support networks. So I just wanted to mention real quick that if anybody out there is listening and you are contemplating this, or if you know somebody who is, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 800-273-8255. And you can also look that up on your phone or on your computer if you need to. You can listen to the number again if you missed it on our replay on tfrlive.com. Again, that's 800-273-8255. And so, Robert, I wanted to ask you, since you have direct personal experience, you can speak to this in a way that a lot of people can't. And so with people that are experiencing these depressions and even thoughts of suicide now with the current situation, which is a very unusual situation for all of us during our lifetime, what would you recommend if somebody is in a really bad position? How can they start to really turn that around like what you experienced?
Yeah, great question. I appreciate you asking that. I'd say the first thing is to do precisely what you just mentioned. If you're in a situation where you, are really thinking about committing suicide, or you're beginning to put together a plan or anything like that, seek professional help. And even if you're not at that place, professional help is so incredibly time-saving and energy-saving. And, there are folks out there in the world that have dedicated their entire lives to solving the one problem that you're most struggling with, whether it's depression or suicide or anxiety or a phobia of some kind or some kind of trauma. So there are people that can help you find the answer and solve for that problem in a fraction of the time that you might otherwise. And so whether you seek those people out, directly, or whether you seek out their books or audio tapes or lectures or whatever it is that you find, most helpful, I would encourage that first and foremost. The second thing I would say is, part of the challenge and opportunity these days is to find things and focus on things that you love, things that make you feel inspired, happy to be alive, excited, to feel energized. And it's easy to lose track of that if you're spending too much time on the news or you're spending too much time with folks that aren't feeling that way. They're not feeling tapped into and turned on. It's easy to lose sight and track of that which makes you come alive. And so creating this happiness islands list is very, very helpful. So you just sit down and you identify the things, the people, the places that make you feel easily and effortlessly uplifted. And you do what you can to schedule more of those things in your life. The second thing you do is you identify the happiness valleys in your life. Those are things that no matter how much time, energy, or effort you spend on or with, you just feel drained as a result of those things. You don't enjoy them no matter how hard you try. And so you want to create this happiness values list. And the idea there is that you want to outsource delegate, reduce, or eliminate as many of these happiness values as humanly possible, whether they're personal ones or professional ones. Sometimes you find there are certain people, and it can be hard to let people go. But the truth is, at the end of the day, if you can find some time and create some space to become stronger and happier and healthier and wealthier from the inside out, you'll be a much better friend to that person later. You must be a better source, of support for that person in the future if that's a choice of yours. But we all kind of have to save ourselves the best we can. And if we can lean on friends and professionals, that's very helpful and very good. But there are infinite resources out there in the world. I would start with those two things, just sort of focusing on doing what you can to participate in more activities, spend more time with people and in places that make you feel good, spend less time with those things that don't, and then lean into the science. There's lots of science that has found what scientifically and empirically leads people to live happier lives, right? We want to live happier lives, if possible, with less time, energy, and effort. Yeah, sure, it takes some practice, but things like gratitude exercises or writing a gratitude letter, or simple things like learning how to be optimistic by telling that better feeling story based in truth. Sometimes it's keeping a self-love journal. Other times it's just acts of kindness. But there's a lot of science out there that strongly suggests what can help you lead a happier life, but not just a happier life. As a result of living a happier life, you can also live a more successful one and a more loving one and one that's healthier, and it improves your life in all ways to be happy.
That's some great tips there, Robert, that I'm definitely going to share with other people as well. And, I want to go back to your story when you were younger growing up. And, you said you always remember yourself since a young age being unhappy. Do you think that school played any role in fostering this unhappiness with yourself?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You couldn't have said it better. The folks, without question, I know most, of all them were very well-intentioned folks, and that being said, when sometimes I think kids have a natural interest and curiosity, and they love to learn. I mean, kids are little sponges, and there are things that I love to learn about. And unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that I most wanted to learn about, or the things that I most needed to learn about, things like how can I relax when I'm really upset, or how can I self-soothe and emotionally regulate, and how can I become more confident, and how can I get along better with others? None of that stuff was taught, and I think, lots of the things that I was taught, and I think we were all taught, really had more to do with just sort of stuffing our heads with information. It was a lot of often memorization, but we were taught sort of what to think, but not necessarily taught how to think. I had to learn that later, and positive intelligence wasn't anywhere on the curriculum. So, folks are aware positive intelligence is not just, yes, it's thinking positively, but it's mostly thinking in ways that is constructive and that will help you in your life. And so whatever it is that you want to achieve, can you be your own best friend? Can you be your own best advocate? And so, I wasn't taught any of that stuff. On top of that, imposed a very tough structure and very rigid, schedule. And I think sometimes that was a little frustrating as a kid. You're kind of full of energy and, you've got sort of an organic rhythm and cadence that to your day and to yourself, but you're kind of seduced away from that. You're trained away from that. And you're also trained, I think, to begin to prioritize extrinsic rewards and extrinsic motivation over intrinsic motivation. And so instead of doing things for their own sake because you enjoy them so much, you do things because they'll get you a reward, or they'll get you a compliment, or they'll get you a good grade, or they'll get you, some other kind of, acknowledgement in the world. And while it can feel good to the ego, ultimately we know that if a person lives their life mostly driven extrinsically, it's not going to be a very enjoyable life. They'll experience low subjective well-being, low happiness, but also it's hard to be successful when you spend most of your life living up to other people's expectations and pursuing other people's goals and purposes for you. So absolutely, you couldn't have said it better, Kathryn. I definitely think there are much better, more effective, efficient, efficacious, and enjoyable ways to approach education. And if I'm not wrong, I think you all might be already ahead of the game there.
Yes, yeah, we were just talking to Robert before the show how we're anxious to be starting a very alternative type school for kids, which is really focused in nature. And I wanted to touch on that because so many kids these days are not out in nature like they used to be because of all the electronics and, social media and the pressure there. I want to get into that, but we are going to be taking a break soon. So we've got about a minute before we take a break, Robert. If you want to just share something quick about nature and the lack of being in nature and how that affects the mind and our happiness level.
Totally. So, the interesting thing there is that, if you look at it, all of nature is perfectly blissful except for human beings. It's like all of nature experiences the same loss, misfortune, accidents, death, disease, all of it. But only people make a problem of that. And that's because only people live their lives in their head and not in reality, right? And so the beautiful thing about being in nature is that it connects you with that stillness, that silence, that presence, and that blissfulness that is so very natural.
Awesome. Well, we are going to take that into the break. We are on today with Robert Mack, happiness coach. If you want to learn more about Robert, you can go to www.coachrobmack.com during the break. We will be back in about 3 minutes. You are listening to Spirit's Journey on Truth Frequency Radio and Oneness Talk Radio, and we will see you on the other.
We are TFR.
My faith in destiny is all I need to prevail.
Truth Frequency Radio.
Back from the break. If you are just joining us, this is Spirit's Journey with Patrick and Kathryn Andries. We are coming to you live on Truth Frequency Radio and Oneness Talk Radio, among others. We are here today with Robert Mack, who is a positive psychology expert and celebrity happiness coach, and we are very excited to have him back today. And so, Robert, as we are coming back, I wanted to ask you, because I don't know if I mentioned earlier when we were on last time that my background's in physics and biology. And so at that time, there was this emphasis, I remember, that they were talking about a division between the hard sciences and the soft sciences. And since I always had a love and interest in metaphysics, I always thought it seemed a little bit arrogant, whenever they would talk about the hard sciences versus the soft sciences. And of course, psychology was lumped into the soft sciences. I was wondering if you were ever offended by that distinction, or if anybody in your field when you were studying talked about that, and kind of what maybe your thoughts are on psychology as being a legitimate science.
I love this question. I really struggle. I always thought that I wasn't very smart. So I kind of leaned into that. I was like, oh, soft science, that sounds like it might be something that'll be easier that I can actually do, And so, I did well in school, but it was mostly because I was, afraid of my dad. He was a disciplinarian. He was a great father, most loving guy. But he was also, intent on us getting good grades. And I still love and appreciate him for that. But that also meant that it's possible I was going to lean into the softer stuff. And so I leaned into psychology for that. I get the distinction there. It is a little tough for, I think, some of us to understand, how psychology works as a science. But, the truth is that I think in lots of ways, psychology has so much more to teach us about how to create a truly better world for everyone, a more peaceful one, a more loving one, a much happier one, a much wealthier one even, that we often give it credit for. And the truth is that when it comes to the science of psychology, and particularly positive psychology, we do rely heavily on self-reports, right? And so that means I have to ask you how you feel about things and what you think about things, and I have to trust what you say about it. And there's always some bias built into that, right? Because you might, if I'm an experimenter and you're a participant in the study, you might want, to look good in my eyes, or you might want to get along with the other participants or whatever. And so, we account for those things, when we do the statistics around, the psychology results, and if it's not statistically significant, so if the power of the effect isn't big enough, we can't really report on it and say, hey, this is something that is happening here. So, yeah, I never took offense to it. I always sort of understood what was being said there. The interesting thing, I think, however, is that, for me, I tend to judge ideas by how helpful they are to me in my life. And I found very few things as helpful as psychology, as spirituality, as metaphysics, and I think the best test is to apply it directly to your own life and then see what results you get in your own existence. That's always the best test for me.
Yeah, I think my first encounter with that kind of idea was I didn't really know how to take it at first, since I had such a strong background in metaphysics, and I knew that would be qualified as a soft science. But then I came to realize that really it was describing more, at least in my mind, that psychology and metaphysics were more subjective, like what you're describing, whereas some of the things where you could go into a laboratory and hook up equipment and read gauges and get solid results, those were much more objective. And so there was a purpose to this, really, because what I was wanting to lead into is from the scientific standpoint, with psychology being more of a subjective science, is there something equivalent to like a formula for happiness?
Yes, there is. So scientists have kind of come up with this formula for happiness, which is, H, happiness, equals C plus S plus V. So what does that mean? Well, S is genetic set point, right? So we have sort of a genetic predisposition for a certain level of happiness. And so people hate hearing that, right? Especially when you also tell them that, listen, 50% of your happiness sort of rating or level can be attributed to your genetic set point, right? Now, the difference between, let's say, your happiness genetic set point, eye color, or height is that happiness and your genetic set point around happiness can be changed. It's malleable, it's plastic, right? So we can actually do things to, improve our happiness score. We can do things to even diminish our happiness score. And so I'll get into more of that in a minute. But so 50% of it is genetic, but it's malleable, it's plastic. The C in that equation stands for conditions, really circumstances. So the objectives of conditions and circumstances of your life really only account for 10% of your happiness. So that means if you're living a perfect life, you have as much money as you can possibly imagine or want, you're in the perfect relationship or a series of relationships or multiple relationships that you've ever desired, and you're in perfect health and you're rich and famous, you've got everything you want, altogether, that still only accounts for 10% of your happiness score. That really often frustrates people because they sometimes think they can, improve their happiness a great deal just by rearranging, the circumstances and conditions of their life. But that's not necessarily the case. The V in that equation stands for voluntary or volitional. So these are the activities, the things that you do on a daily basis, on a weekly basis in your life that improves your happiness score. And so that accounts for about 40% of your happiness rating or level overall. So that means that 50% genetic predisposition, which is malleable, changeable, 40% also up to you. That leaves 90% up to you, and only 10% is what we would, call conditions or circumstances, so like health and wealth. And so that is extraordinarily exciting for those of us who want to live happier lives, right? Because it means most of it, and I would go further than that and argue that really at the end of the day, I'd say that happiness is completely within our control, that it's really an equal opportunity endeavor. That happiness is something that we can all experience more of and enjoy more of if we just apply ourselves.
So that is empowering. So Robert, would you, and this might seem harsh to people, but so if what you're saying is true, that 90% is within our control, or, even more, would you say that people who do slump into depressions that last on and on and on, and they give excuses, well, I'm depressed because this person did that to me, does it ultimately boil down to a victim mentality?
Yeah. So the way I would say it is that, learned helplessness, which is essentially trying to do something but not getting the results you want. That experience of doing something over and over and over. So maybe in some cases it's like, trying to make more money and it's not working for you, or trying to get this person to love you and that's not working for you. And so having that experience where you do something over and over again and it's not getting the result you want can lead people to feel or experience learned helplessness. And learned helplessness over time begins to spiral into depression or clinical depression, right? Now, mostly what learned helplessness is, though, it looks like it's something about the world, but really it's about something that's going on inside of our own heads. Now, lots of folks will say, there are lots of things going on in our heads and particularly in our brains, and there are, neurotransmitters and chemicals that, turn up and turn down essentially our subjective well-being or happiness levels. So endorphins and dopamine and serotonin, all these things are interacting. But we know that when you think new thoughts or different thoughts and you surround yourself with new people or people that, are much more supportive in terms of feeling happier, and we eat foods that are healthy, that all of these things both turn on and turn off these, the dopamine and serotonin and all these neurotransmitters, and it helps our, neurons wire more effectively together and fire sort of more consistently in ways that are a lot healthier. And so we know that we can control or influence our biology and even our physiology by the thoughts we think and by the things we do and by the people we surround ourselves with. So at the end of the day, if I were to sort of reveal what I most struggle with, at first I thought it was just this idea, that I wasn't getting the results I wanted. So I would try to achieve, accomplish, or acquire something. And in most cases, I didn't achieve or accomplish or acquire what I wanted. In the few occasions when I did, it never seemed to deliver on the happiness that I thought I should be getting from it, and even if I did get a little bit of pleasure or happiness, the happiness and pleasure didn't last very long. And so I came to realize that it wasn't really about the world, but it was about my approach to the world. And that most of that was something that was going on inside my own head. I was a ruminator. I was an overthinker. I was an over analytical person. And so if I were to reduce my own clinical down to sort of the nuts and bolts, it was simply a mind that couldn't sit still, be quiet, and simply enjoy silence and stillness and presence. And that also wasn't able to find or discover the silver lining or the advantages or the positive benefit within anything, right? And so those two things sort of worked in concert, where I was constantly seeing and looking for the worst in situations and experiences and people, including myself. And also I couldn't turn off that thinking. So when I discovered that it was, at the end of the day, really about learning to focus in ways that made me feel better, and it was just that simple, and that if I practiced it, I could get better at it. And if I got better at it, my brain would continue to rewire itself to make that easy and automatic for me. Once I discovered that, things really began to shift and change.
I recall this story of this producer. I believe he was a producer or director. I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was talking about how he had reached a level of success in Hollywood. He really reached a point where he was becoming recognized. The money was coming in. He had just purchased this giant house, got everything moved in, walked in the doors, and realized that he wasn't one little bit happier because of that experience. And I think it might be Tom Shadyac.
Yes.
Possibly.
Yeah, he did the movie I Am.
Yes. He was also the producer of Pet Detective, right? With Jim Carrey. And
Right,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah, he worked with Jim Carrey on the Pet Detective series. Yeah. So he was talking about all that success. He walked in, he felt like physically he'd reached this pinnacle, and he's like, wow, I'm no happier than I was before. And so he's like, I need to start looking elsewhere for my happiness.
Oh boy, isn't that? I mean, you can imagine a pretty frustrating experience. I think we've all had a taste of that. I know I've had more than my fair share taste of that. It can be frustrating, but it also could be extraordinarily inspiring to realize and recognize that maybe we've been working too hard at this happiness thing, And we've been routing it through middle people and middle things and middle acquisitions and middle awards like money and things our entire lives. And that maybe we can go directly to the source for it. And, there's something that positive psychology really has to add in a valuable way to this conversation. And that is that, most of us have some sense that achieving, accomplishing, acquiring what we think we want won't deliver us the happiness that we expect it to. But we're sometimes doubtful of that. So we still chase the things we chase, the people and the money and the success. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. It's just that we want to contextualize that within the science that's basically found that practically nothing you think leads to happiness actually does. So for instance, most of us think that more money does. And we do find that if you make less than $75,000 a year, at least in the United States, more money will mean more happiness, at least more sort of life satisfaction. Once you hit about $75,000 in the United States on average, more money does not mean more happiness. You start to experience what's called the diminishing marginal utility of the dollar, which means you get less, quote unquote, happiness for each additional buck. And at about 125,000, you really flatline, and sometimes you even start to go in the other direction. More than that, most of us think, well, if not money, then certainly health. Health has to mean more happiness. Who doesn't want to be healthy? We all want to be healthy, especially in the midst of a pandemic and all that. But we've actually found scientifically that there is no correlation between objective health and happiness. That just because your health does not mean you're necessarily happier, but there is a correlation between subjective health and happiness, meaning how you perceive the health you have. So you might even have some terminal disease, but you're so in touch with the spiritual health or a concept of health or perception of health that you feel happy nonetheless, right? And there are other people that are in perfect health that feel very unhappy. And so we sometimes also think, well, okay, maybe not health and not money, but certainly marriage and kids. And I think if any of us have lived long enough, we sort of see through that illusion. We can't expect someone else to make us happy when we can't do that for ourselves. And science supports that and says, look, you get a small bump in your happiness when you first get married, a little honeymoon phase. It's so nice. But then you quickly return to your baseline level of happiness, the level that you experienced before marriage. And with the first kid, and we all love our kids, and we wouldn't want to trade our kids. Most of us wouldn't want to trade our kids for anything. But with the first kid, you get a slight dip in your happiness level. And with the second kid, you get a statistically significant dip or decline in your happiness level. And your happiness levels don't return to their baseline levels until those kids leave the house. So whether it's 18 or 30 or 70, you don't return to your original baseline level of happiness again. And that doesn't mean that we don't love our kids. It just means there's a lot of stress and responsibility and anxiety and worry that comes with kids, right? And so very little to nothing of what we think will lead to happiness actually does. And sometimes I say that by simply saying nothing you think leads to happiness, because it means that sometimes even our thoughts get in the way of our happiness. Often it's our belief in this idea that happiness exists in a future outside of us that really is the main obstacle to us experience the happiness that exists within us right now.
Wow. Yeah, always. The grass is going to be greener if. And so obviously we can conclude that success does not always lead to happiness. So the question I have is, if we are happy, if we do a lot of the exercises you suggested, stay positive, if we can keep that vibration of happiness, fairly consistent, do we have a greater chance of attaining success, whatever that means for each person, whether it's a better job, more money,
That's right. You just nailed it. I mean, happiness to me is the greatest success. I mean, it's the reason we want success. The only reason we strive for success is to reach this end goal of happiness. So instead of routing our happiness through success, why not route our success through happiness? So happiness is the greatest success, but it also leads to traditional forms of success. When you get happy without the money, you make more money. When you get happy without the partner, you suddenly discover you're much more attractive with respect to partners and relationships. So we actually know that's true too scientifically. Folks that have authentic or Duchenne smiles, meaning one that you can't fake because it activates over 200 muscles in your face, actually are rated more attractive than their unhappy counterparts or the unhappy picture of themselves, right? So it is happiness is attractive. So it's the greatest success, but also leads to success, both in relationships, in terms of money, in terms of health, longevity, whatever it is you're after. You are really after happiness, and you might as well go directly to the source for it here and now. That means finding a way to be happy without all the stuff you want, without all the people you want, right here and now. Often the fastest way to do that is simply to let go of all the thoughts you have about happiness and simply dive deep into yourself. That often means just letting your thoughts go, breathing from the stomach, and enjoying whomever and whatever you happen to be doing at the time.
So what would be like then the master key to success? How would you describe that?
Yeah. I would say it's happiness. I would say happiness is the master key to success, and presence is the master key to happiness. And presence is two things. The actor Vince Vaughn would say that, presence is keeping your mind where your body is, and that's absolutely true. It's like when I'm Swiffering, can I just Swiffer? Or if I'm doing the dishes, can I just do the dishes? Do I also have to think about all the laundry I have to do and all the work? Can I just be here now and enjoy the water running through my fingers? There's a great Zen expression, which is, it's only painful to do the dishes when you're not doing the dishes, meaning when you're thinking about something else. And that's true of practically everything. It's only really painful to do most things when your mind is distracted by all these other things that are going on in the world, or all these other things that you should have done or could have done or have to do later. And so it's both keeping your mind where your body is, but it's also keeping your mind relatively quiet. Happiness to me is simply that experience of peaceful aliveness that's in your body right here and now. Inside your body, you can feel there's an alive energy. There's life itself. And that life energy is silent, and it's faceless, and it's formless, and it's thoughtless, and it's wordless. And it already is happiness. And if you spend time just feeling into that, without any other intention than to simply commune with that life force, sometimes people call it God, they call it source, but it's that life force that you're one with. And you spend more time with that, you quickly discover that you can be in the midst of chaos and confusion and conflict and a world that seems like it's on fire, but you can feel cool, calm, composed, and confident and clear. And that clarity and that confidence and that composure becomes contagious. And next thing you know, the people around you are feeling a little bit better, and the people around them are feeling a little bit better. We know that emotion is the most contagious element on the entire planet, more contagious than any virus, infection, disease that's ever been discovered. You can pass emotion through the phone, through a radio interview, through the internet. And so if there's one thing that you want to do to improve your own life, to improve the life of those that you love the most, and to improve the life of those individuals in the world at large, it's to simply find time to dive into that timeless aspect of yourself that is already perfect happiness and peace and love already.
I'm going to have to tell our teenager about the fact that doing dishes is more fun when you're really focused on it, because boy, we get a lot of flack about house chores around here.
That could be a tough sell even for the adults, so you're going to have to let me know how that goes.
So I loved your example of the breath exercise, because that's one thing I talk to students about sometimes is that, you can go for weeks without food, you can go for days without water, but you can only go for minutes without breath. So that's like the most important thing that we do each day. And I love that simple focus that you described of bringing your attention to the breath. And if you feel like you can only just take one breath, just take that breath, and then, see if you can stay focused and breathe a little bit longer each time. So what would you say is the best tool that you might recommend for people to be happy?
Yeah. So I would say what you just referred to, I call it practicing the presence. The one thing that takes it deeper for me, you can start with the breath, and that is the best place to start because the breath is always with you. And, you know that if you're alive, then, existence and life itself loves you, right? So that's the first thing, is you've got purpose and meaning here. And so connecting with the breath, sort of reminds you of that. And not that you need to be thinking anything at all to enjoy the breath. And then you can take that a little deeper and just begin, instead of focusing on the breath, just focus on that experience of life inside you, that very subtle energetic force within you, the same life energy that hangs the earth to nothing, that rotates the earth on its axis, revolves it around the sun, and revolves the entire, galaxy around this dark matter spot in the universe, right? And the same thing that keeps the sun shining, grass growing, and the rivers ebbing and flowing. That same life energy is also within you, and in fact, it is you. And so sometimes instead of using the word life, I use the word God. But the idea is, just take a simple affirmation. It could be something like, I'm one with God, or I'm one with the source of everything. And then really feel into that by feeling into your body and noticing that life energy that's in your body, and recognize and realize that spending time with that life force, with that God energy, with source itself, is happiness already. At first it feels very subtle, feels just like peace or just like aliveness. As you continue to spend time with that force or that life energy, simply for the joy of it, it's like a dimmer switch. It just gets turned up higher and higher and higher. And before you know it, you're returned to this sort of natural state of peace, love, and happiness. And then all of a sudden, these things that you've been chasing and running after begin to chase after you, or they begin to run after you. And you don't have to, so desperately seek for things, they start seeking you. So I'd say that's probably the greatest practice of all is, we start with the metaphysics, start with really the psychology. And we start with the metaphysics, remind ourselves that we're one with the source of everything. And we begin to recognize that or feel into that as the life energy within the body. And we come to a place where there's just silence. And in that silence is perfect peace, love, and happiness.
Wow. And so folks, if you want to learn more and these tools you want to try, I suggest Robert's book, Happiness from the Inside Out, The Art and Science of Fulfillment. So Robert, I've loved talking with you. We've got about 1 minute left. So do you want to share with the audience how they can get in touch with you, where they can buy your book?
Absolutely. So you can find Happiness from the Inside Out, The Art and Science of Fulfillment, my book, everywhere great books are sold, including Amazon and Barnes & Noble. You can also find my website at coachrobmack.com. You can find me on all social media platforms, especially Instagram, at Rob, R-O-B, Mack, M-A-C-K, official.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Robert, for being on with us again. We always love having you on. It has been great as always, and we look forward to having you back sometime down the road. Robert, again, is a positive psychology expert and a celebrity happiness coach, and so you can find his book once again at any Amazon or Barnes & Noble, Happiness from the Inside Out, The Art and Science of Fulfillment, as well as www.coachrobmack.com. And you are listening to Spirit's Journey. We love having you with us. Please connect with us on Facebook at Spirit's Journey Radio. Be sure to like our page so we can be part of your life and you can be part of ours. And also you can learn more about us at intuitiveschool.com. We are live on Truth Frequency Radio, simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio, among others. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Kathryn. Have a great week, everybody. And we will catch you next Saturday.
See you on the other side.